So if you're testing the vertebral column, whether it's active or passive, the place that the most movement is available, so you can name it in the osteopathic sense, is seated. If you want to name it, you have to prove that it side bends one way and does not side bend the other way. So if you say something is side bent right, it cannot side bend left well. So if it side bends right really well and it side bends left really well, you would never note a side bending problem because there is not a side bending problem. If it rotates really well one way and does not rotate well the other way, well, then you name it for the way that it rotates. So if it rotates really well left and poorly right, it is left rotated. Okay? But you have to check both sides or else you cannot make the call. Now, the common osteopathic approach is if I find a restriction on one side in any position, I just name it. And then I use the Friat model to fill in the other side. That is completely unacceptable because you didn't check it. Okay? So if you want to name the motion of the vertebral column in the osteopathic sense, the only way, what I would argue the most appropriate way is in seated, right? And I would actually argue that the most appropriate way to be able to name it is active because I can see it, right? So if I want to work on side bending, many of you were practicing this in the room, which is fantastic. You end up essentially here, good abdominal contact. So I show this way, like I kind of make it look weird on purpose, right? So if I do this and just with abdominal contact and I lean on her, she bends the opposite side, right? Okay, so I can't tell anything from this, right? If I do this, right, and I side bend her way over here and way over here, look, she's side bending real good right. Does it look like I actually assessed side bending of the vertebral column or did I just move L5 on S1? That's a windshield wiper, right? So if I do this, simply having my forearm across, I turn her into the letter C. Whoop, well, you don't like to turn into the letter C so good, you wiggle, right? So here, now, do I know exactly what this is doing? I know there may or may not be restriction. I can palpate along the vertebral column. I can find a restriction, but can I name it in a way that you would trust? I would argue no, right? So, and then I would do this on this side. Now, superficially, does everybody notice this thing immediately just sitting there, right? Okay, it's like, oh, wow, that's different, right? Then side bending would be here. Now, it looks like she does this way better, right? Like just so as far as restriction is concerned and ease of generating the motion, this feels way easier to me. However, if I compare, and maybe I'm wrong, this may not match. Bend to your left as best you can. Turn the letter C. Looks pretty darn good. Bend to the right. Okay? Yeah, so it seems to match. Wait, no, it doesn't seem to match. Doesn't match. There we go. Okay, so bend to the left. Okay, she bends real good, right? When she does it on her own, right? Bend to the right. Okay, she doesn't do that real good, right? Up here moves, down here just is trash. But if I do it passively, it looks completely the opposite. Okay, which one would you trust more for me to name it? Active. Okay, so we do have a problem with passive testing, especially if we can't see the stuff. Now, as far as rotation is concerned, I would just kind of grab and twist. So we don't. Okay, I'm going to do this first. Twist this way. Okay, twist the other way. Everybody sees she moves, right? She twists, okay? I'm going to use supine to demonstrate the problem with a lot of testing in other positions. We'll talk about flexion extension another time. I do have videos on that where basically in seated, you make them generate the movement first and then you add passive because I don't want to lift her up all the way. It's really annoying, right? In extension, it's just bad because I'll never get to extension. So we saw the rotation. Everybody saw the rotation. Lay on your back, okay? Does this test vertebral rotation?
Pushing on her shoulder.
Pushing on her shoulder. Okay. Well, look, I'm creating a posterior to or an anterior to posterior force, so I'm placing that through her thorax with her shoulder as a girdle, or shoulder girdle as a handle. No. Does this test rotation? Okay. Does this get far enough to check any meaningful motion restriction with respect to rotation compared to what we saw her do actively and seated? No. This does not test rotation. Does this test something? It tests something. We just have to be very clear on what it is. That shoulder looks like it sits high right? So let's just say I push on that, okay? I feel restriction, but if I was to judge like how far it goes, I would automatically say she's rotated to the left because this sits high, but I may be able to make that have more excursion. It may go farther. So then I would have to say, well, she actually rotates better to the right. It's like, no, her shoulder's funny. And it's not testing rotation. If I wanted to test rotation in the lower portion of the vertebral column here, I could make the claim that I could use the pelvis as a handle and twist her, right? So I'm not going to palpate the spine. I'm just going to show you what the movement would look like, okay? Does that look like I'm testing rotation that she can actually do? No. I'm not going far enough. The table's in the way. If I wanted to check rotation above, I can do, as long as it's okay, I can do this, right? But am I getting a good read, or is it just going to start to get, because I can pull forever and ever and ever. Eventually stuff down there will move, right? It's not the most comfortable. I'd have to palpate somehow. If I palpate on this side, I can't move as well. If I palpate on the opposite side, I'm going to hurt my hamstrings, right? Side bending of the torso, not easy to do. Table's in the way. Same thing would be true in prone. As far as rotation from the bottom, I can use the pelvis. I can use the leg, right? I can do this. Okay. Now, if we compare how the actual movement occurs, does this work better, or does pulling the pelvis work better for generating the rotation?
I would say pelvis.
Yeah, pulling the pelvis.
More like rotating
The hip won't go far enough to let me pull on everything else, right? So, sorry. I can move far better there. I can get more rotation out of that. If I cross the leg over, because it puts more bind into it, sorry, my mic felt funny. I can go farther now, right? So this is fine, and there's not much effort on me. I can palpate here, but I don't know why I would, because it's a general movement. There's so many things involved. I don't necessarily know what the heck is going on. I can attempt to generate flexion from here. Bend both your knees, right? So one of the things that you will see is stuff like this, right? Now, if I do this, you won't see it necessarily, but the moment I do this, am I honestly testing flexion? Not necessarily, because I'm in an odd position and I can bring her off axis just based on how I move, so it's tough. So this would be better as far as palpation is concerned. I'm not going to have any under the circumstances. This is one of the reasons I leave my shoes untied, because if I'm going to put my foot on the table, I'd rather have a sock than a shoe. I can do this, right? Way easier on me. I'm going to feel some restriction, but I'm not going to get to proper flexion, and I'm not going to have a proper understanding of it. I can't see it. I can't feel it. I feel general stuff. So if it doesn't work well, I can immediately turn that into a treatment, right? But the table's in the way. Can I do extension? Cannot do extension, right? I can do side bending. I can, especially from the bottom, I can be at the bottom of the table and I can grab both legs and walk. I can also slide over here, and then I don't have to bend it all, right? I can do that. That's about as far as you want to go, right? Fair. I'll go to the other side, right? So I'm standing, I pin her against my thigh and I walk, right? So I don't have to squat. Squatting can actually be very powerful. You just don't want to lift the legs much. But here, grab both, pin them. Well, that sucks worse, right? But it doesn't necessarily match what we found in seated, right? Or no, that does. Yeah, because the right side didn't want to side bend in seated actively. So at least that matches. But it's a very broad general sense. So unfortunately, if you want to know what the vertebral column is doing as far as its restrictions are concerned, in an accurate way that you can name it with osteopathic nomenclature, seated is your option, right? I'll show you something else. If you lay in prone, I'm not going to pick her up and wiggle her all around. I'm going to be as lazy as it's possible to be. I want to test for restriction, not for flexion, extension, side bending, rotation. I just want to know where it doesn't move good, okay? Take a deep breath and let it out. Okay, looks about there, right? So you won't all see it just because of angle, but you take a deep breath. Okay, we get some wiggles there, and then let it out. Yeah, like it just kind of looks funny there. So basically, I would do that, and then I would get closer. I'd put my hand on the area. So it's like I got a big window, a smaller window, a big window, a smaller window. Take a deep breath. Yeah, and let it out. Yeah, it's junk there. And that at least matches what we found so far. So you will have similar findings with where the restriction is, but your ability to name flexed, extended, side bended, rotated, that's seated. You're not going to name it properly, and I'm not going to trust you. So unfortunately, all the other tests have value, but they don't let you name it unless you're making major assumptions based on a descriptive system that was built in the early 1900s with a disembodied vertebral column with no soft tissue and somebody thinking. So no. Yeah, all of the tests will tell you where restriction is inside of the test itself. So the test is the movement, the finding is within that test, the treatment is within that test, and the retest is within that test. It will have value, but your ability to name what it's doing in osteopathic nomenclature is almost non-existent unless it's seated. And you're behind them so you can observe it, right? Unfortunately. Okay, so we're good.